Welcome to the Get Unstuck Aha Moments in Editing workshop in support of a Student Journalism Challenge. Thank you again so much for being here. My name is Christine Nicholas. I'm on the Student Reporting Labs team. And before we start, just have to let you know that we are recording this workshop and you can find it on Student Reporting Labs YouTube channel later, along with some of the other workshops recordings. And we'd love to hear from you along the way today. So to start, if you could introduce yourself in the chat, just write your name, where you're calling from, and if you're feeling brave, where you're at in your project for the challenge. And so we're here for a quick moment about the Student Journalism Challenge, and then mostly we'll be digging into a conversation with a couple of fellow student reporters about what's helpful in the editing process, especially in those moments when you might be feeling stuck kind of late in the game, figuring out your story. And as I mentioned before, we want to hear where you are and the questions that you have, kind of what you're dealing with right now. So please feel free to drop any questions or ideas or in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can along the way. And before we get into the conversation, what is the Student Journalism Challenge? If you're here, you might know, but it is a contest for students who are 13 to 18 years old. You can submit your print, video, or audio story on the theme My Education, My Future by December 2nd at 11:59 p.m., which is coming up in a couple of weeks. And we're looking for short pieces. So video audio project should be less than 4 minutes and print should be less than 500 words. And again, that deadline is December 2nd, 2022, 11:59 p.m. ET. And you can find all of the information you need to submit, including guidelines, criteria, lots of resources to help you along the way at studentjournalismchallenge.org. I'll drop that in the chat as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to our awesome speakers for today. So we have current Student Reporting Lab student Dakota Hendren, who's a senior at Royal Oaks High School in Michigan, and Reporting Labs alumni and recent graduate of the University of Houston, Angeline Abrera. So over to you, Angeline.
Hi, y'all. So like Christine said, I'm a recent grad from U of H, and I studied media production and women gender studies. And right now I am currently working more in the music and entertainment space. So I'm working for a lot of different orgs, one called the DigiLog, we're a music and tech org, a music business startup called Green Room, and I'm also a freelance photographer on the side. So a lot of what I deal with is storytelling in very different mediums. So it's always really fun getting to work with SRL again. And yeah, just super excited to hear about y'all's projects and hopefully give y'all my 2 cents on storytelling.
Hi guys, I'm Dakota Hendren, as she said, and I am a senior at Royal Oak High School in Royal Oak, Michigan. And I've been I started working with SRL last year a little bit, and then I went to the summer academy, and I've been really doing more work with them this year. So I'd love to tell you guys my tips on editing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know you've done a lot of projects throughout your SRL career so far in high school right now, Dakota. So yeah, tell me about a time when you were trying to figure out how your story would come together, and then you suddenly had an aha moment that helped things fall into place, and what helped you?
So recently I got to talk to the vice president about youth voting, but the problem with the story was I was kind of working backwards, so that was a little difficult. But just figuring out how the story went together, and I thought the story was done, but then I was like, it's just not there yet. So even though I thought the entire project was done, I went back and I did 2 more interviews, and they really just made the whole story, just brought in new perspectives, and it made it into a story, really. I mean, it wasn't really a story without them. So it completed the story. So just being open to thinking you're done, but then going back and adding things to make it more of a story. And just being open to having a less traditional timeline with my project. So I was always taught you do this and then this and then this, but sometimes your story can come together in different ways. And so you have to be open to that. So what about you, Angeline?
Yeah, and I agree 100% too that, you can just kind of let it flow sometimes. But yeah, an example for me would definitely be at the SRL Academy back in 2017. And so we were focusing on the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, and we had to focus on a youth circus group, the Wenatchee Youth Circus Group. And I remember we didn't know what angle we wanted to go in before the trip. And so even while, during my week in DC, we were still trying to figure out like, okay, do we want to focus on, just the group, or do we want to focus them being at the festival? And so of course we did both, but yeah, I just remember it taking a long time to figure out what direction we wanted to go in. And I think what helped me the most, which is very overlooked, is really diving into all the tedious research that you have to do. And I think research is really what makes for great storytellers and interviewers, because you're able to find an angle or a person of interest or some small detail that may not have been on your radar before. And I think, really digging into their past or like their backstory can help you find a really unique angle that way. And so, this of course goes for movies and print and every type of storytelling that you can do. Research is key. And that's what we did for our story, is that I read into the Smithsonian Folklife Festival and like what they were truly about. And I learned more about the members of this youth circus, and I was able to find my angle that way.
So when you're creating a story, how much do you assume that the person already knows about a topic?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on the target audience, but just for me, I guess a general rule of thumb is I like to assume that no one has any idea what I'm talking about, which of course is the reason why I'm creating, this story in the first place. And I think that it's really important to set a really good foundation at the very beginning of your piece, because you want to make it brief enough to let the rest of your story do the rest of the work. And of course, that is the whole point of storytelling, is letting that unfold. But as far as context goes, and figuring out how much to include, just keeping it very brief, letting people know what your what is. And I feel like, of course, that definitely can be challenging if you're still back and forth on what topic you want to do and what you want your beginning, middle, and end to be. So this also leads me to ask you, Dakota, what has helped you structure your story and figure out the right sequence for you?
So you guys are gonna hear me say this a lot during this, but feedback, literally, like when in doubt, feedback, like ask someone, like don't sit there and ponder, like ask. I'm sure you have tons of people around you can ask. It doesn't have to be someone who knows anything about editing, so just whoever you can find to give you feedback. I have found that to be the most helpful thing for me. And then also like transcribing things. I know it's so tedious, I know it's annoying, but transcribing things, and I personally find that it's helpful to cut out the transcriptions so you can move pieces around and kind of look at them not as the person who said the words, but like what the words are and really piecing them together. And I found this really helpful when I was at the SRL Academy when we were doing a story about goat yoga of all things. But we didn't necessarily agree on a format. But we were able to move the pieces around together and like compromise and figure out exactly how we wanted it to be, based on like, well, it needed to be like a combined piece. We couldn't have these two separate stories. So like we all sat together. It was really late and we like figured it out before we went to bed, which was really nice and it was a big relief. So yeah, that's my feedback for that. And then so Angeline, my question for you is, when you're starting to edit, how do you know what to keep and what will best fit your story you're trying to tell?
Yeah, so or how I decide whether a soundbite is good enough for me to use is asking myself, does this soundbite or quote help move the story forward? And are we able to trace it back to the topic that I'm talking about? Because I'm definitely the type that wants to keep everything. Like I want to keep the whole interview, but of course that's never possible. And so it definitely has always been hard for me in every project that I've ever done to not keep everything. So when it comes to choosing sound bites in general, I'm always just making sure I'm using the best one that truly helps my story and, my narrowed down angle and, have it traced back to that. And so I think a really good way to help with this is really crafting your questions that will get you the answers that you want. But then again, this is not, you shouldn't limit yourself to, during the interview, a question comes to mind while you're speaking to your interviewee. And I think those questions that happen in the heat of the moment can really make for the best answers. But yeah, I think at the end of the day is, really looking back at your interview and cutting up really good sound bites that do trace back to your initial story, to your what, and what you're talking about, because those sound bites, those quotes in your written piece make the story. And so Dakota, so when you do have your sound bites in order, your beginning, middle, and end, where you want it to be, what's on your checklist before you say that you are officially done with your story?
So really quick, in response to what you said, like I definitely think like all of my interviews, those questions I threw in there last minute, like, oh, I'm just curious about this. That's a majority of what I put in, because like those always end up being like the on the spot, like really good answers that they weren't necessarily prepared for. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. But in terms of video, which is my area of expertise, I would definitely say my basic checklist is like color correcting and audio levels, making sure that it's peaking, like the peak is at -12. So those are like the basic ones, but like I said earlier, feedback, always feedback. So even when I think I'm done, we still have to be open to maybe we thought it was done, but it's not necessarily done. So I really want to emphasize what I said earlier about like, even if you do have a room full of people who know how to edit and everything like that, find someone who doesn't. Like, you want to know how someone who doesn't know anything about the topic and doesn't know how to edit, how they will view your piece. So yeah, I would just say like have someone view it. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's an easy thing to do, and I think it really helps bring your story together so you can understand um, how the audience will see it. So, Angeline, what advice do you have for other people who are currently going through the editing process? What tips do you have?
Yeah, so I would say just in general, even right before the editing process, is organization is key, especially in pre-production, of course, and for me, right before post-production when I'm about to edit, because I think organizing all of your files, your videos, audio, all assets that you have beforehand make it go so much smoother. And what I do is I like to have a folder for each medium, each asset. So one for photo, one for video, one for audio, but also labeling these files and have them correspond with each other. So let's say, okay, this video goes with this audio. And so whenever I have everything organized in my hard drive, I'm able to just, drag and drop it into Adobe. And yeah, just labeling is really important, especially, just right before, and it just makes it go so much smoother. And the same goes for print too, really, is organizing your thoughts. And, you want to know what each paragraph is going to be, or what section that you're going to cover. And so I think that also makes writing go so much smoother. But in terms of editing itself, I would say what you were saying earlier, honestly, is having that outside perspective, look at your work, because they can always catch something that you may have looked over. And, as someone who's editing this piece like hours on end, you don't catch all these small details. And I think really having that outside perspective is super important.
Angeline,
Yes.
just a question regarding that. When you say you organize, when you say stuff like this video goes with this audio and whatnot, do you try to put similar labels on each of those audios and videos to try to match them up? Like, let's say you had an audio of a specific person talking, and then you have a video of that specific person talking. Do you put on the label let's say the name of the person and the specific abbreviation to indicate which is which?
Yeah, so what I do is, so usually with the audio files that I have worked with, it runs for the entire interview of one person. And so I'll just label that audio file, that person's name. And so I know right away, okay, with all these video clips, maybe I did a few takes of this one person or multiple video files of this one interviewer or interviewee. I know that, okay, this one audio goes with all of these videos. And so I just label it by the person that I'm interviewing pretty much. And then I'm able to cut it up from there, or sync it up and then cut it up from there.
Okay.
Mhm. Good question though. Good question though.
Thank you.
And Angeline, Dakota, does that wrap up your questions? Do you have a chance to answer?
Really quick, I would also like to give my feedback on that. So I just have like a simple tip. Just don't rush into editing. Like if you're not ready to edit yet, you can still go back and like I said earlier, not following that traditional timeline. You can go off of that track. I mean, it's your goal to be on that track, but you can always change it up a little bit if you need to. And also don't rush the editing process. And make sure to take breaks.
Breaks are good. 100%.
Excellent advice. And I see we have a question from Anita in the chat. Anita, do you want to just unmute and ask your question since we're a small group?
Hi, I'm Anaya, and I was wondering when writing this, how do you make your what you're saying sound less like a list and more and flow more smoothly, like when writing different ideas?
Are you talking about just brainstorming, or are you talking about when you're writing your final piece in general?
When you're writing your final piece.
Yeah, oh, that is a very good question. I think, especially when you do have your paragraphs broken up into sections, just really finding a way. And I feel like this kind of goes or relates to how I've been asking Dakota questions now, is trying to find that transition point. And okay, how am I able to transition from this paragraph to the next and not making it sound like a list? And I think a really great way to do that is maybe you can try tracing it back to your topic, or you can explain I don't know, I feel like I don't have an example right now, but I think, yeah, just finding really good transition sentences, whether that's at the very end of your paragraph or at the very beginning, that either goes back to your topic. But yeah, I feel like that would make it go a lot more smoother or sound a lot more smoother, especially in writing, because it definitely is hard to, not make it just a straight list or bullet points for sure.
That's great advice. And thanks for asking that question. Another thing that I've found helpful kind of in the past, and you can tell me what you think also, but sometimes when you're trying to find like what the crux of your story is about, or trying to make it more like conversational, you can practice just like find someone around you and tell them kind of what your story is about as a story, like as you would tell a friend. Sometimes that framing can help a little bit when you're kind of dealing with a lot of information that you've compiled with interviews and research and that sort of thing. And
I also
go for it.
I also just wanted to add to that, like kind of a different way to do that too is whenever I'm writing at least an essay, I don't usually write stories, but when I'm writing an essay, if I want to know like how it will be read, I'll put it into text to voice on my computer so I can hear what it would sound like or how someone else would read it. But that's just me.
Great.
Hey, Dakota, Angeline. So going back to the feedback question, like what do you find is the most useful feedback? I mean, if someone's like watching your piece, I know one kind of specific question to ask is like, what feels slow to you? Like, where does your attention start to drift away? Or what feels like it doesn't fit with the rest of the story? But what are some of the questions, and I mean, anyone can answer this, like, what are some of the questions specifically that you feel like you've gotten the best feedback from people that have helped you rethink or look at your story through new eyes?
Here, I'll answer first. I think in just projects I've done in the past, especially when it comes to broadcast journalism, when I did have someone look at my story, a lot of what they suggested to me, or I guess what has helped me in editing, is they or just looking at the quotes and like their sound bites, I think is really important, because a lot of the times it was just a matter of me moving it to a different section, and it just made it sound so much better. And because I've watched it over and over again, it's like, okay, yeah, this sounds good. But when I look at it, and from them, and they haven't looked at my story at all, and they think, okay, I think this should go in the beginning, or I think this should go more towards the end, I feel like that's made for such better edits. just with the people that I've been able to work with, and mostly just in broadcast journalism. But yeah, that's like the biggest feedback that I've always gotten, or I guess like one of the main points I've always gotten from other people is just moving my quotes around.
For me, like watching them listen to it and like it's a good way to know audio levels too. Like if they're like I don't know, like that's a weird sound I just heard. Like I don't notice some of those things when I'm editing in sections. And then also there was like one interview I did and I was like, yeah, I don't know, like I put this in, but like I don't know like if I should actually include them because there's not a lot that they said that I think I can include. And so I actually had someone I know like look at the transcription of the interview too, even though I hadn't put those parts in. And they were like, whoa, like what they said there like is really good. And to me, since it was about something I haven't done yet, like it was about voting and I'm 17. So having the perspective of someone who's voted, I was like, oh, I didn't know that there like that was an issue. So like just having someone verify what people are saying, and the viewer might find some things more important than what you included in the video. So even having people look at the transcriptions too, I found that to be super duper helpful.
That's great advice. And for people who've maybe never transcribed something before, do you have like tips for people, or do you want to talk even a little bit about the process? Maybe Angeline?
Yeah, I just remember at the SRL Academy, we had like 4 people or everyone in our group transcribing different sections, or I think it was different interviews. And so we were all like typing away, trying to make sure we obviously hit the deadline, but so no one had to do all the transcribing themselves because it's a lot of work. But I think, you know, with projects that I have transcribed, it just made it so much easier to edit because I know where certain quotes are in the video, because we'd also put the timestamps. And so we would just like reorder our story that way. And I'm a very visual person, so just like visually moving that piece before I actually edit the video was incredibly helpful.
Anything to add, Dakota?
Yeah, I find that transcribing and cutting it out really helps me connect deeper to my story, and see exactly what my story is telling people. Because, I mean, they're not just looking at the people saying it. They like, now I know what all the words that are going to go to a person. When I just look at the video, I don't really get that as much. And it definitely helps remove some bias too, because you're not looking at who said it anymore. Also, I do not usually hand type. There's also some websites you can transcribe on too, if any of you want to look into that and you don't know about that. There's one called Otter AI, and it will let you only transcribe like 2 or 3 like files for free, like every few months. But if you make a few accounts, you'll be able to get more too.
Yeah, that's great advice. And there are, yeah, the old-fashioned way to do it would be to just like listen to your whatever your recording is, if it's audio or audio and video, and just like type up everything that people are saying. So now with the help of computers, there's faster ways to do that automatically. You usually still have to go back in and sort of correct a lot of the computers like aren't perfect translators, right? So you have to go back in and kind of say like, okay, well, they didn't actually say marshmallow, they said something else. But that's kind of what the transcribing process kind of looks like. And those are great advice for tools as well, Dakota.
True enough. The today I had to transcribe an interview from Virginia Beach, and there were a lot of mistakes in the speeches that he said that I had to correct in Premiere. Adobe Premiere didn't do it perfectly, but it got most of it right. But still, there are those corrections you have to watch out for.
Great point, Corwin. Yeah, and I see we have another question in the chat from Leah, which is, Angeline, you are too old for the challenge, but if you weren't, what story or like theme would you think about for the My Education, My Future theme of the challenge?
Oh gosh, I have no clue. Or I guess what are some topics that y'all are talking about? Because I honestly, off the top of my head, don't know. Yeah, it's a good question, but I'm curious to see like what y'all's topics are about. Maybe I can think of on my own.
Yeah, and Dakota, if you want to share yours too, if you have thoughts. I think you had an idea you might be working on.
I did. It's about religion in school and about the difference between individual religion and organized religion. So accommodating for religion, but not organizing it.
A very big topic to hit in 4 minutes. But thank you so much for sharing that. And I know we have a bunch of people on this call. If we have any brave souls who maybe want to share what you are working on, and of course, if you have any other questions, we can do that too. You can just raise your hand or unmute and tell us where you're at with your story.
Hi. Nice to hear from you guys. This is still kind of a work in progress with the idea, but I was thinking of tackling the rankings that are within the schools in the sense of, especially in my high school, we have a thing of regulars, honors, and AP classes. So I was thinking of tackling that system and the things that go within it.
That's really interesting, Mia. Have you had a chance to talk to, like, interview folks at your school about that already?
I haven't quite. It has just been a little bit busy, but I'm definitely trying to still kind of figure out the way I want to approach it in the sense of, do I want to talk more student based or do I want to get some specific teachers' opinions? I definitely know that some of my friends that I've talked to, we have talked about the subject before, especially when it came to advanced placement classes in our high school, because of the few that they offer. And so it's very hard to bounce back from that if you don't adjust properly or just don't feel it's a good fit. And so I'm still kind of debating on how I want to tackle that. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being brave and telling us what you're up to. That sounds like it could be really interesting. And I don't know if Dakota or Angeline have any kind of thoughts or advice based on that.
I can respond. First off, my school doesn't have a ranking, so it's really interesting to hear about it because I didn't know until probably this year, like that we're one of the only schools that doesn't really have rankings in the area. But we do have AP classes and such. But I would say what you said about like interviewing students or teachers, for me, I tend to lean more towards students because we're kind of helping represent the student voice. So usually I'll interview like 1 or 2 adults, but I try to keep it more towards students so we can hear their different perspectives.
Great advice there, Dakota. And Angeline, I see you have an idea in the chat. You want to talk about it a little?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always been super interested in the arts. I did choir for like all of middle school, high school, and right now I'm working in music, and I've always been super interested in film and photography. And so a lot of, I don't think it was my school specifically, but I know that in a lot of districts, a lot of art programs are not funded as much as sports are, or like they don't get, you know, this like really new equipment, or a lot of the money just goes to a new stadium. And I think in my school, old school district, they're building a performing arts building of some sort, so that's really cool to see, even though I had left a long time ago. But I know that for the arts is really something that people don't think is worthy of funding, and it really has always been super focused on sports. And I would love to see, you know, a really big change in that. I don't know, I can't think of a specific program or district in my head right now, but you know, seeing a lot of programs being either cut, or you know, students aren't wanting to do it because they don't have certain equipment or certain supplies that they're able to use in order to create what they want to create, you know, and then all the sports are being funded and promoted. And so I would love to, you know, really dive into that a little more and see what we're able to do to help, you know, fund these programs, or what's a way that school districts or even a certain school can do to change that. And I guess I'm talking in terms of just like high school and more middle school, because college is a different story. But yeah, it's definitely something I would love to look into for sure.
big topic, lots there for sure. Free ideas if you're still looking for story ideas, because Angeline's still old to submit.
You can take it. You can take it.
And we have a minute for a couple more questions, or if anyone else brave wants to share kind of where they're at with their story.
Hi, I just wanted to share like my idea and kind of like get feedback on it because I'm a bit behind. So the idea that I'm kind of exploring is here in Hawaii, people on the higher ups, they're kind of like changing standards curriculum to kind of make it more work-based related. And there's even efforts on the local level in high schools that are working to create classes and different projects to help students more towards like a career related like plan after high school. And I'm kind of working on like finding subjects and like getting there, but the idea is still a bit broad.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Kate. That's what kind of like, is it all different types of like professional training, or is it like focused on specific types? And Angeline, looks like you had a question too, so you can go when once Kate's done.
Yeah, so it's kind of as a whole. We have different like sections: culinary, tourism, hospitality, and they're all kind of like changing like curriculum wise. On the higher up, they're creating like academies to kind of create different curriculums and all of that. So it's kind of like as a whole, and it's like this big change, which is kind of controversial now because it's like taking the old and modernizing it in a way.
That's fascinating. Yeah, Angeline, did you have something?
Yeah, that was actually one thing I wanted to ask about is, are there like opposing views to, you know, do people agree with it or not? Because I feel like it can definitely go both ways. And I guess it also can help you decide like what questions you want to ask, because I can see it, how it can truly benefit like the student body and like, you know, figuring out like, okay, I really like this. I'm going to, you know, work on this in high school or middle school, and it will help me out in my career. But there, of course, are a lot of people that don't know what they like. And I feel like that can definitely be another topic that you can dive into, because even, you know, after college, a lot of people, or if they don't go to college, you know, they don't know what they want to do. And so maybe that can be a challenge for some people. And so maybe that's something you can ask about. But yeah, that's really interesting. I never knew about that. I'm just now hearing it. So it's really cool to hear a story that I feel like people haven't talked about a lot, for sure.
Great. Thank you so much for all your guys' input and advice.
Really quick, I just want to add, hi Kate. Haven't heard you in forever. But I would say like it's a really good topic to cover, especially if it is controversial, because I'd be curious like what the students actually say about it, because in my community, a lot of times there are controversial things, but it's just parents and adults that are the ones that think it's controversial. So it's really important to hear what the students actually think, because in my community a lot, I feel like they kind of talk for us. And I feel like it's better when we talk for ourselves, especially when it's something directly affecting us and not them.
Excellent advice for every story. And I see we have a couple more things in the chat. Alexa, I know you shared a little bit in the chat, but do you want to unmute and tell us a little bit more about your digital literacy classes story?
Yeah, of course. So at my school, we have a digital society class, and the primary goal of that class is just to explain to students like what effect our technology uses will have on our futures and stuff. So I kind of wanted to make a story about that and just put it on a wider scale, like what will our digital footprints have on us getting a job? Like if an employer Googles our name, what's going to come up? So I wanted to make a story about if digital literacy classes should be mandatory instead of an optional elective that my school has.
Super interesting. Yeah, Angeline, Dakota, thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know. I never like knew that this is something that we would have to be required, because I feel like when it comes to technology, you know, a lot of people don't know how to, you know, go about it. Especially like right now, I know a lot of people use LinkedIn for their resumes. And so I know there's a question about resumes too in here. But yeah, a lot of people don't know how to use LinkedIn. So that's like one thing that I've noticed too, is that technology is really all about accessibility. And I think one way to look at it is a lot like having that class be required can really help people that don't have access to all of that. And so I don't know if that's like what kind of or direction you would want to go in, but yeah, when it comes to technology and being digitally literate is all about accessibility, because a lot of people may not have the technology at home to do all these different things. And so that's a really awesome topic that you're wanting to cover for sure.
Hi, Alexa. I definitely agree with everything Angeline said, and I feel like yours and Kate's story like also supports like the broader story of like how can education like I feel like what you guys are, it's just how is it keeping up with what we're doing? I mean, I think digital literacy should be like incorporated into our classes. Like, and a lot of times I do see that these classes that could really help us in the future are electives, and those are a limited thing to us and not as accessible because not everyone can just take every elective. So I definitely think like based on the like how we're progressing in society, like incorporating those things into our curriculum could be really helpful to us in the future. So I'm curious to see what students think about that and if they would want that curriculum regularly in school.
You bring up some excellent points and themes, Dakota. And Alexa, did you want to say something else? I saw your mute button go off.
I just wanted to thank you guys just because I didn't think of like the accessibility viewpoint on this just because of the way my community is. Like we all just sort of like assume that like, yeah, everyone has access to a laptop, whether it be at a public library or their own personal one. So I think that accessibility viewpoint is also something that could give us another creative angle.
I love it. There's so much good stuff bubbling. I see we have a question from Miriam, and maybe Angeline, you want to take this first. How have you used your work with SRL to enhance your resume? And Dakota, same for you in the future.
Yeah, so it took me a while to craft my resume, but yeah, I still have all the projects that I've done, and I think this is kind of moving away from like the storytelling, but with your resume, you kind of do want to craft it to whatever you are applying to. So I've used SRL, or I did a fellowship with SRL right after high school, and so that was a really good way to, you know, show basically my organizational skills and also again storytelling, of course. And so yeah, if you have any further questions though, I can definitely help you out, Miriam, with your resume. But yeah, I still use it or use all my SRL projects. I even have a portfolio of like all my work that I've done. So that's another option. If you just want to, you know, have all your links in one place, I can show you an example too. But as for editing software, I use Adobe Premiere Pro.
I also use Adobe Premiere Pro. That's just what I started learning in school, so that's what I've stuck with. And I also have a LinkedIn, and I found that to be really helpful with making connections. Sometimes when I couldn't get a hold of like interviewees, using LinkedIn was really helpful for me. And then also like just a big part of it is just connections. Like that's SRL gives you so many connections. Like when I heard that the vice president was coming to town, we ended up emailing SRL and being like, hey, Kamala Harris is coming to town. Like, is there any way we can make this happen? So having those connections and just always reaching out to people. SRL knows a lot of people. So I've just found that I've gained so many connections from them that will definitely really help me, especially right now in the college search process and the application process. It has been helpful to me adding to my resume and adding to my applications about SRL, especially since I do want to go into broadcasting in college.
Thank you, ladies.
Excellent advice all around. Especially amazing that you're already on LinkedIn, Dakota. That literally didn't exist when I was in high school. So very cool. And it is a great reporting tool as well.
It is actually part of our curriculum too. It's mandatory for us to make a LinkedIn, and like I like to keep mine up to date. I guess kids could have just created it and stopped using it, but yeah, that is part of our curriculum, which is nice for me to have those certain things that I have to do, and like they're fit into my schedule already, and it helps prepare me for the future because my broadcasting class is a career class. So.
That's so nice because I didn't have a LinkedIn until like my junior year of college. So that's really cool that you're starting it really, really early to really, put all of your projects in there. That's awesome.
And we have like 1 more minute, 2 more minutes. If you have any final brave souls who want to share where they're at with their story or any last questions. Otherwise, oh, yes.
Oh, sorry, there's a lag. I did come in late and I just got a message from Christine that you're about to wrap up. So I'll be quick and brief. My name is Troy. I'm from Prairie Public up here in North Dakota. And we just finished doing a youth media cohort with some high school kids from Fargo South. So we just did some projects and that kind of carried over. If anything, the editing stuff that we use, well, what I mean by we, our education department, and I guess our whole member station, we use Final Cut Pro. And so right now with Final Cut Pro, I have a good idea what the basics are. But I think one thing that I want to work on is how to edit something that has the correct deliverable. Meaning by that, am I editing something that's going to be used for like an existential or something for like a sizzle reel for like learning media or something for a promo? So it can be something about for youth-centered learning media or even something for the older generation, like for the teachers, how to differentiate the different editing styles to fit that where this piece of content is going to be laid at home. So yeah, that's why I was interested in being here. And like I said, I'm gutted that we're about to be done, but yeah, I'm glad that there's a recording.
Yeah, we're so glad you could come. And we've been seeing Prairie Public kind of post about the Student Journalism Challenge too. And it'd be cool to connect more about kind of what your program's been working on, because that sounds amazing. And it's really cool to hear about.
Yeah, for sure. One of the professional development courses that we did last month was called Amplify Student Voices. And so we brought someone in from, we had PBS, some of our producers come in, and as well as outside independent contractors come into like a college and teach like teachers to be or teachers who are looking for a professional development credit to continue on with their teaching. On courses about youth media and how to better implement that in their classes, and they would get classroom credit for it, for their professional development. So I think one of those projects that we came up with definitely was something where if I was a teacher, I would definitely take it. I know for myself as an educator in the education department, I want to step my game up as being a better editor.